The afternoon sun was burning down on the streets of Atlanta when Officer Karen Mills drove her patrol car through a quiet residential area. The neighborhood looked clean and peaceful, but in her mind she always believed trouble could come from anywhere. When she saw a shiny black sedan pass by, her eyes narrowed. The driver was a well-dressed black man in a crisp white shirt, calm hands on the wheel. Karen's first thought was not about safety or traffic, it was suspicion. Something in her heart told her he didn't belong here. Without much thought, she flicked on the siren and signaled him to pull over. The man slowed down immediately and parked by the curb. He rolled down the window and waited. Karen stepped out, adjusted her sunglasses, and walked over. "License and registration," she said sharply. The man handed the documents without a word, his movements careful and polite. "Is there a problem, officer?" he asked in a calm, steady voice. Karen frowned. She didn't like how composed he seemed, as if he knew something she didn't. "You were driving suspiciously," she replied, even though she had no real reason. The man blinked, confused. "Suspiciously? I was just going home from work," he said softly. Karen's partner, Officer Davis, stood quietly behind her. He knew her temper and decided not to interfere. Karen circled the car, pretending to check for violations. Everything was spotless, the car, the documents, even the driver's tone. But her pride refused to let go. "Step out of the car," she ordered. The man sighed, unbuckled his seatbelt, and stepped out slowly. He was taller than she expected, calm and dignified. He said again, "I didn't break any rule, officer. Maybe there's a misunderstanding." For a second, Karen felt something, doubt maybe, but she pushed it away. As he tried to explain, she interrupted him, her voice firm. "Hands on the hood." He hesitated, surprised by how harsh she sounded. That hesitation was all it took for Karen's anger to rise. She thought he was resisting. In a sudden move, she struck him on the shoulder, shouting, "I said hands on the hood." The sound echoed down the empty street. Davis froze in shock. The man didn't fight back. Instead, he placed his palms on the car and looked over his shoulder with eyes that carried sadness, not rage. "You'll regret this, officer," he said quietly. His voice wasn't a threat, it was a promise of truth. The silence that followed felt heavy. Davis stepped closer and whispered, "Karen, maybe we should cool down." "He's cooperating." But Karen ignored him, still caught in the heat of the moment. She took his ID again, trying to find something, anything that justified her actions. His driver's license showed his name clearly, James Carter. The name sounded familiar, but she couldn't place it. She returned to her car, still trying to convince herself she was right. Back at the station, she filled out the report as if nothing unusual had happened. She wrote that the man had been uncooperative, that minimal force was used to ensure compliance. It was how she always wrote such reports, short, cold, and defensive. Her partner didn't say much, but his silence spoke louder than words. He had seen the look in James's eyes. There was calm power behind them, something that didn't fit the image of an ordinary citizen. "You sure you want to write it like that?" Davis finally asked. Karen looked up, annoyed. "What's your problem?" "He disobeyed a lawful order." Davis nodded slowly. "If you say so." As the evening rolled in, the station grew quiet. Karen sat in the locker room, tired and restless. The day's events replayed in her mind. For the first time, a small seed of doubt began to grow. Why had he stayed so calm? Why didn't he argue or threaten a complaint? Most people would have yelled or resisted. His composure unsettled her. She tried to shake the feeling off, convincing herself that she had done her duty. But somewhere deep inside, she knew something felt wrong. The next morning, as she entered the precinct, the air felt different. Officers whispered near their desks. The chief's secretary looked tense. Before Karen could sit down, the intercom buzzed. "Officer Mills, report to the conference room immediately." She frowned, glancing at Davis. "What now?" she muttered. He only shrugged, though his face looked uneasy. She walked down the hallway, her boots echoing against the floor, her mind filled with questions. When she opened the conference room door, time seemed to stop. Sitting at the head of the table was James Carter, wearing a gray suit and a calm expression. Around him sat the chief, senior officers, and city officials. Karen's throat went dry. The chief stood up and said, "Officer Mills, this is Deputy Commissioner James Carter, our new department overseer from the city board." Her heart pounded. The man she had hit yesterday was now her superior. James looked at her, his eyes the same, steady, thoughtful, not angry. "Good morning, Officer Mills," he said softly. "I believe we've already met." The room was silent. Every pair of eyes turned toward her. Karen wanted to disappear. Her hands trembled slightly and she could barely speak. "Sir, I didn't realize," he interrupted gently. "No, I'm sure you didn't." His tone wasn't cruel, but it carried weight. "That's the problem, officer. You didn't realize. You didn't ask. You just assumed." Karen felt her face flush with shame. The chief cleared his throat. "Mr. Carter is reviewing our department's community relations policies," he said. "He's seen your report and the dashcam footage." Karen's knees weakened. The footage. She had forgotten about it. Everything she said in the report, every action she took, it was all recorded. She wanted to explain, to apologize, but no words came out. James didn't look triumphant. He looked disappointed, and that hurt more than anger ever could. After the meeting, she sat alone in the locker room again, staring at her reflection. The person in the mirror didn't look like the confident officer she once thought she was. She saw fear, guilt, and a dawning awareness of how blind she had been. For years she thought she understood justice, but now she wasn't so sure. Somewhere outside she could hear other officers whispering about what had happened. The story was already spreading. Later that day, as she prepared to go home, she passed by James's office. The door was half open. He was on the phone, discussing reforms and training programs. His tone was calm, focused, full of quiet strength. Karen paused, listening for a moment, then walked away. For the first time she felt small, not because someone had power over her, but because she realized how little she truly understood about respect and fairness. That night she couldn't sleep. The memory of that calm voice haunted her. "You'll regret this, officer." It wasn't a curse. It was truth. And deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning of her reckoning. Karen sat at her desk early the next morning, staring at the blank report form on her computer. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, but she couldn't type. Every sound in the station felt louder than usual. The ringing phones, the chatter of officers, the hum of the air conditioner. Everyone seemed to know what had happened. They tried not to look at her, but whispers followed wherever she went. Her partner, Davis, gave her a small nod, but his eyes were full of sympathy she didn't want. She replayed the conference room scene again and again in her head. James Carter's calm expression, his quiet voice, and the way the chief had looked at her. It was like the ground beneath her had shifted. For years she had thought she understood what power meant. Power was her badge, her uniform, her authority. But yesterday she had faced a man who had all of that, and something more. Dignity. Karen finally began typing, trying to correct parts of her report. She wanted to make things sound less harsh, less biased, but before she could finish, the chief called her to his office. She took a deep breath and walked in, keeping her head low. "Officer Mills," the chief said slowly, "you understand how serious this is." His voice was firm but not cruel. "Deputy Commissioner Carter isn't pressing charges, but he's ordered an internal review. He wants to meet with you again this afternoon." Karen's heart dropped. "He wants to meet me?" she asked quietly. The chief nodded. "Yes, and for your sake, I'd suggest you listen more than you talk." When she left the office, the morning sunlight coming through the window felt sharp, almost blinding. She sat in the break room, stirring her coffee but not drinking it. Davis joined her after a while. "You okay?" he asked softly. She gave a small laugh. "Okay? I hit the new commissioner yesterday. I think that's the opposite of okay." He shrugged. "You made a mistake. But he doesn't seem like the kind of man who holds grudges. Maybe he's giving you a chance." She stared at him. "A chance for what?" "To change," he said simply. At 3 p.m., she walked down the same hallway that had terrified her the day before. This time she knocked softly before entering James's office. The door opened and his assistant gestured her inside. The room was bright and organized, with photos of community events on the wall. James sat behind his desk reading a report. He looked up as she entered, his eyes calm, his tone professional. "Officer Mills," he said. "Please have a seat." She sat down slowly, her heart pounding. "Sir," she began, "I just want to say—" He raised his hand gently. "Let's not start with excuses. I've read your report. I've also watched the footage. I want to hear what you saw that day." Karen hesitated. "I saw a man in a nice car driving through a quiet area. I thought he might be up to something." James leaned back, studying her. Because? Her throat tightened. Because it didn't look like he lived there. And what made you think that? He asked. She looked down at her hands. The truth tasted bitter. Because he was black, she whispered. There was silence in the room. James didn't look angry, just deeply thoughtful. You know, he said quietly, I've been pulled over many times in my life. Even when I wore a uniform myself. Her eyes widened. You were an officer? He nodded. For 15 years. Before I joined the city board, I worked the same streets you do. The difference is, when people saw me, they didn't see the badge. They saw my skin first. Karen's chest felt tight. She wanted to disappear. Sir, I didn't mean to. He stopped her again. I believe that. But intentions don't erase actions, he paused. I'm not here to humiliate you, Officer Mills. I'm here to make sure this doesn't keep happening to anyone. His words weren't cruel. They were careful, almost gentle. That made them even harder to bear. James stood and walked to the window. You know what I saw that day? A scared woman trying to prove control. But real control isn't about shouting or hitting. It's about knowing when to listen. Karen nodded slowly, feeling tears she didn't expect. You're right, sir. I lost control. I let my assumptions guide me. He turned back to her. Then learn from it. I'm not asking for an apology. I'm asking for understanding. She frowned slightly. Understanding? He nodded. Starting next week, you'll join the community outreach program. You'll work with families, students, and local leaders. Listen to their stories. Learn what fear feels like from the other side. Her heart sank. Sir, are you reassigning me? Not permanently, he said. Think of it as retraining. You'll report directly to me. She didn't know whether to feel relieved or frightened. Working directly under the man she had wronged was the last thing she expected. But something in his voice told her it wasn't punishment. It was a lesson. That night, as she drove home, her mind was full of thoughts she had never considered before. She passed through neighborhoods she once viewed with suspicion. Now she saw children playing, parents returning from work, people living their normal lives. For the first time, she realized how unfairly she had looked at them before. The next week began quietly. Karen showed up at the community center wearing plain clothes, no badge, no gun. People looked at her differently now, not with respect, but with caution. A woman at the front desk smiled politely. You must be Officer Mills. Mr. Carter told us you'd be helping. Karen smiled weakly. Yes, that's me. Her first day involved talking to teenagers about safety. At first, they didn't trust her. One boy crossed his arms and said, Why should we listen to a cop? You people don't listen to us. His words stung more than she wanted to admit. She took a deep breath and said, You're right. Sometimes we don't, but maybe we can start today. The boy looked surprised, then slowly nodded. The rest of the group began asking questions, real questions about fairness, safety, and respect. By the end of the session, the tension had eased a little. Every day after that, Karen learned something new. She listened to mothers who talked about being afraid when their sons went out at night. She spoke to store owners who wanted peace, not conflict. She realized how her uniform, once a symbol of pride, could also bring fear to others. James visited the center often, quietly observing her progress. He never brought up the past again. Instead, he asked about the people she met and what she learned. One afternoon after a long community meeting, he said, You're starting to see the real work, aren't you? Karen smiled faintly. Yes, sir. I thought enforcing the law was the job, but it's really about understanding people. He nodded. Now you're beginning to get it. For the first time, Karen felt like she was learning something meaningful. The guilt in her heart hadn't vanished, but it was changing into something else, a sense of purpose. She wasn't proud of her mistake, but she was grateful for the chance to fix it. That night, as she sat alone on her porch, the air felt different, softer, calmer. She thought about James Carter again, about how he could have ruined her career in one day, but instead gave her a chance to learn. She realized that real strength didn't come from anger or control. It came from kindness, patience, and courage to face the truth. She whispered to herself, maybe this is how real change begins. And in her heart, she knew her story with James Carter was far from over. It was only the beginning of something much deeper. A journey from blindness to understanding, from authority to humility. Weeks passed, and Karen's days at the community center began to change her in quiet but powerful ways. Every morning she arrived early, still in disbelief that she, Once one of the most rigid officers in the department was now sitting on plastic chairs, handing out flyers and listening to people talk about their fears. At first she saw it as a punishment, but as the faces of the people she met became familiar, something inside her started to shift. One morning, while she was setting up chairs for a youth program, James Carter walked in. He wore a simple shirt, no tie, no badge, just a calm presence that instantly made the room feel lighter. The children greeted him warmly. "Hey, Mr. Carter," they said, rushing to shake his hand. Karen watched from across the room, noticing how everyone seemed comfortable around him. He had a quiet authority that didn't rely on shouting or commands. It came from respect. After the event, James approached her. "You've been doing good work," he said. "People are starting to trust you." Karen smiled a little. "I don't know about that, sir. They still look at me like I'm one of the bad ones." He nodded. "It takes time. Trust doesn't grow overnight. But the fact that you're here, that you're trying, means something." His words gave her courage. Over the next few weeks, she spent her evenings visiting neighborhoods she had once patrolled with suspicion. Without her uniform, people treated her differently. They talked to her, told her their stories. One elderly man shared how he was once stopped and searched for walking too slowly outside a grocery store. "I didn't even argue," he said softly. "I just didn't want trouble. But it hurt. You feel invisible." Karen didn't know what to say. For the first time, she understood how deep the pain ran. That night, she couldn't sleep. The old man's words echoed in her mind. "You feel invisible?" She realized that her actions had once made others feel that way too. A few days later, she was called back to the station for an internal review meeting. The entire department had to attend a new training session, led by none other than James Carter himself. The officers filled the conference room, some curious, others annoyed. Karen sat in the back, nervous. James began the session by showing short clips from the dash cams of various officers. Some showed good conduct, others mistakes. When her clip appeared, the moment she pulled over James and hit him, Karen's heart stopped. The room went silent. No one moved. She wanted to disappear, but James didn't look at her with anger or embarrassment. Instead, he paused the video and said, "This is what happens when judgment replaces duty. This is not about one person. It's about all of us learning to see beyond assumptions." He didn't name her directly, but everyone knew. Karen kept her eyes on the floor, her hands clenched. When the video ended, James turned to the room and said, "We all have work to do. Every single one of us." After the meeting, she walked out quietly, her heart pounding. She didn't feel humiliated, she felt exposed. The truth had been laid bare for everyone to see. And yet somehow she also felt lighter. There was no more hiding. Later that day, James found her in the hallway. "That was hard, wasn't it?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes, sir. But maybe it needed to happen." He smiled faintly. Growth always hurts at first. Something about the way he said it made her look up. His eyes weren't just kind, they were proud. For the first time, she felt that he wasn't just supervising her. He was mentoring her. Over the following months, Karen began leading workshops for new recruits. She spoke about communication, empathy, and understanding community pain. She never used her own story as an example, but her tone carried the weight of experience. "When you wear the badge," as she told them, "you don't just represent the law. You represent trust. Don't break it." Many of the young officers respected her even if they didn't know the full story. Some said her sessions were the most meaningful part of their training. Every time she taught, she remembered that day on the roadside, the day she let anger control her, and how far she had come since then. One afternoon, while working late, she found James alone in his office, staring at an old photograph. It was of him in uniform, standing with his old team. "That was before I joined the board," he said when he noticed her. "Before the politics, the paperwork, the speeches, back when I thought I could change everything from the street." Karen leaned against the doorframe. "You still are changing things, sir. Just differently now," he smiled gently. "Maybe, but it's people like you who make it real. Change isn't about speeches. It's about stories, and yours might help more people than you realize." Karen was silent for a long time. Then she asked, "Why did you give me a second chance?" James looked thoughtful. "Because someone once gave me one. A long time ago, I was angry too. I made mistakes, judged people too quickly. Someone saw potential in me instead of failure. I just did the same for you." Her eyes softened. Thank you, sir. I don't deserve your kindness, he shook his head. You don't have to deserve it. You just have to pass it forward. Those words stayed with her. From that day, she dedicated herself fully to change. She started organizing events where officers and citizens could talk openly. Slowly, the tension between the department and the community began to ease. People started seeing the police not as enemies, but as partners. One night after a long meeting, James walked her to her car. The air was cool, and the city lights shimmered across the streets. You know, he said quietly, the first day I met you, I thought you'd never listen. But you did. That's rare, Karen smiled. And the first day I met you, I thought you'd ruin my career. Instead, you saved it. They both laughed softly. It wasn't the laughter of friendship yet, but of mutual respect. As she drove home that night, Karen reflected on everything that had happened. She realized that real leadership wasn't about control or pride. It was about the courage to admit when you're wrong. She had once believed that strength came from power, but now she knew that strength came from understanding. In the quiet of her car, she whispered to herself, I'll never go back to who I was. And she meant it. Her life had changed, not because of punishment, but because one man chose compassion over revenge. James Carter had turned her greatest mistake into her greatest lesson. And deep inside, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: peace. Little did she know, her story was about to reach beyond the walls of the department, because soon the world would hear about the officer who changed and the man who taught her what true justice really means. Months turned into a year, and Officer Karen Mills had become a different person from the woman she once was. The Karen who had once judged people without reason now took time to listen, to ask, and to understand. Every morning when she put on her uniform, she reminded herself of something James Carter had once said: a badge should protect, not divide. Her reputation in the department slowly changed. Some officers respected her growth. Others remained skeptical, but no one could deny her effort. She volunteered for programs most officers avoided: school visits, neighborhood dialogues, community patrols without backup. She no longer wanted to prove her authority. She wanted to rebuild trust. One day, the police chief called her into his office. Mills, he said, the city board has been watching your work closely. Commissioner Carter recommended you for a new initiative. You'll be leading a team to train officers on community policing. Karen was stunned. He recommended me? The chief nodded. Yes, he said you understand what it means to start over. Her heart filled with quiet gratitude. The same man she had once disrespected now believed in her more than anyone else. The next few weeks were busy. Karen worked closely with James to design workshops for officers from different departments. They created role-play exercises, community talks, and meetings where officers and citizens could share stories face-to-face. It wasn't always easy. Some officers resisted change. One day, during a training session, a young recruit spoke up boldly. Sir, with all due respect, he said to James, you can't teach people not to judge. It's human nature. The room went silent. James didn't get angry. Instead, he smiled slightly and replied, you're right, it is human nature. But so is compassion. We just have to decide which one we listen to. Karen noticed the recruit's expression soften. The power of James's calm words never failed to amaze her. After the session, as everyone left, Karen stayed behind. She and James began stacking chairs together. You handled that well, she said. He's young, but he'll remember what you said. James smiled. People don't change through fear, Karen. They change when they see someone living differently. He looked at her meaningfully. Like you, she looked down embarrassed. I'm just trying to make up for what I did. He shook his head. You're doing more than that. You're helping others not to repeat it. A few days later, Karen was invited to speak at a community event. The hall was packed: citizens, officers, local leaders, and even the press. Her palms were sweaty as she walked onto the stage. James stood at the side, giving her a reassuring nod. She began softly, her voice steady but emotional. A year ago, I made a mistake that could have ended my career and someone's trust. I let my assumptions guide my actions, but instead of punishment, I was given something much harder: a chance to learn. The audience listened in silence. I used to think my badge made me powerful, she continued. Now I know it's supposed to make me responsible. Real power isn't about control. It's about doing what's right even when no one's watching. When she finished, the audience stood and applauded. Some clapped slowly, others with tears in their eyes. She glanced at James, who smiled proudly. That night, as she left the hall, a few community members came up to her. One woman said, "I used to be afraid of police officers, but hearing you talk today gave me hope." Karen smiled, her eyes moist. "Thank you," she whispered. "That means more than you know." Later, she and James walked together through the quiet streets, the city lights glowing softly. "You did well today," he said. She chuckled nervously. "I thought my hands were shaking the whole time." "They were," he said with a grin. "But your words were strong." For a moment, they both stood in silence, listening to the sound of the city at night. Then James said, "Karen, you've come a long way. But your journey isn't over yet." She looked curious. "What do you mean?" He smiled. "Next week, I'm stepping back from this department to take a new position at the state level. I'll be overseeing multiple cities. I want you to take charge of this program here." Karen's eyes widened. "Me? Sir, I'm not ready for that." "You are," he said simply. "You've earned it." For a moment, she didn't know what to say. The idea of leading the very program that had once saved her career felt overwhelming. But deep inside, she knew he was right. This was her chance to continue his work, to pass on what she had learned. The next week, James officially announced his promotion at a department meeting. The room filled with applause and handshakes. Before leaving, he asked to meet Karen privately. When she walked into his office, he was packing his things. "I wanted to thank you," she said softly, "for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." James smiled. "You did the hard part. I just showed you the door. You walked through it." She looked around his nearly empty office. "It's going to be strange without you here." He nodded. "Maybe, but I trust you'll keep the fire burning. Remember, real leadership isn't about being perfect. It's about helping others grow." She nodded, her voice low. "I'll do my best." As he picked up his briefcase, he added, "Oh, and one more thing. Don't let this job harden your heart again. Keep it human." Those were the last words he said to her in that office. After he left, the department felt quieter. But Karen carried his lessons everywhere she went. Over the next few months, she led workshops, spoke at schools, and even helped rewrite policies for officer training. The same officers who once doubted her now came to her for advice. She wasn't the loudest or the toughest, but she was respected. One rainy evening, she was driving home after a long shift when she saw flashing lights ahead. A young officer was conducting a traffic stop. The driver, a middle-aged man, looked nervous. Karen pulled over and approached the scene quietly. She heard the officer's tense tone and the driver's frightened voice. For a second, she saw her old self reflected in that young officer. She stepped forward gently and said, "It's okay. I'll handle it from here." The young officer looked confused but stepped aside. Karen spoke softly to the driver, explaining everything clearly, calming him down. When the situation was resolved, she turned to the officer and said, "You didn't do anything wrong. But next time, remember, fear meets fear with fear. Try respect instead." The young man nodded, understanding the lesson. As Karen got back in her car, she smiled to herself. Life had come full circle. That night, as she sat by her window listening to the rain, she thought about James Carter again. His calm eyes, his words, his quiet strength, they had shaped her life forever. She whispered to herself, "I hope I made you proud, sir." Outside, the rain kept falling, washing the streets clean. And in that moment, she felt the same inside, cleansed, renewed, and ready to keep making a difference. She didn't know it yet, but her transformation would soon inspire others far beyond her city. What began as one man's act of grace had grown into a movement of compassion, proof that even the hardest hearts could change when given a chance. A full year passed since the day Karen Mills had struck a man she wrongly judged. The memory of that mistake was still vivid in her mind, but it no longer filled her with shame. It had become a reminder, a compass that guided her every day. What had started as one of the lowest points in her life had turned into the beginning of something meaningful. Her new role as program leader kept her busy. She was now responsible for training officers from different cities, showing them how to connect with people rather than control them. Every session she conducted was filled with honesty. She didn't hide her past. She used it to teach. "We don't become better by pretending we never make mistakes," she would tell her team. "We grow when we face them." The program started small, but soon news spread. Local newspapers wrote about how an officer who once faced suspension was now leading reform. Community leaders invited her to speak at schools and town halls. Many people came not just to hear her words, but to witness the change that was possible. Some came out of curiosity, others out of hope. One afternoon, the mayor's office called her. They were planning a citywide event called Unity in Action, celebrating positive connections between the police and the community. Karen was invited to speak as the closing guest. At first, she hesitated. Public speaking still made her nervous, and this event would have hundreds of people, officers, citizens, reporters, and even students. But then she remembered James Carter's words. Real leadership isn't about perfection, it's about helping others grow. She accepted. The week leading up to the event was full of preparation. She reviewed her notes late into the night, making sure every word came from the heart. On the morning of the event, the City Hall auditorium was decorated with banners that read, "Trust, Respect, Unity." People filled the seats until there was no room left. Cameras were set up in the back for the local news. Karen stood behind the curtain, taking deep breaths, trying to steady her heart. Before she stepped on stage, she heard a familiar voice behind her. "You've come a long way, Officer Mills." She turned around, and there he was. James Carter, now wearing a suit with the state commissioner badge on his chest. He looked proud and calm, just as she remembered. "Sir," she said, surprised and overjoyed. "I didn't know you were coming," he smiled. "I wouldn't miss this for the world." That gave her courage. As the host introduced her, she walked up to the stage, her hands trembling slightly. The bright lights made it hard to see faces, but she could feel hundreds of eyes watching. She began slowly. "A year ago, I was the officer no one wanted to talk about. I made a terrible mistake because I judged a man without knowing his story. I thought my job was to enforce rules, but I learned something more important. My real duty is to protect dignity." The crowd listened silently. She continued, her voice firm now. "That man I wronged could have destroyed my career. Instead, he became my teacher. He showed me that change doesn't start in policies. It starts in the heart. It starts with courage to see people as people." As she spoke, she saw nods across the room. Officers, teachers, parents, and even young students. Some of them had tears in their eyes. "When I first joined the police," she said, "I thought justice was about power. Now I know it's about compassion. Every day we choose who we want to be, the one who judges or the one who understands." Her voice softened as she ended. "If I can change, anyone can. Because no mistake is final when you have the courage to make it right." When she stepped back, the hall filled with applause. People stood, clapping louder and louder. She spotted James in the audience, clapping with a small smile on his face. Her eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of gratitude. After the ceremony, people lined up to shake her hand. A young recruit said, "Ma'am, I joined the police because of your story. I want to serve with heart, not just with authority." An elderly woman held her hand and said softly, "I lost my trust in officers years ago, but tonight I think I got it back." Karen could barely hold back tears. She realized that change didn't have to be loud. Sometimes it started with one mistake, one lesson, and one person willing to grow. When the crowd began to leave, she walked outside into the cool evening air. The city lights shimmered on the wet pavement. James joined her, his hands in his pockets. "You did well," he said. "I'm proud of you." She looked at him with deep respect. "I wouldn't be here without you, sir," he chuckled. "Maybe. But I didn't do the hard part, you did." They stood in silence for a moment, watching cars pass by and hearing laughter from the people leaving the event. Finally, James said, "You know, when I first joined the force decades ago, I thought I'd change the world. But tonight I realized, change doesn't always come from the top. It comes from people like you." Karen smiled. "Then I guess we're both changing it one step at a time." He nodded. "That's how it's always done." As he walked away, Karen stood under the soft glow of the streetlights, thinking about everything that had happened since that day on the roadside. The anger, the shame, the lessons, and the redemption. Life had tested her in the hardest way possible, but it had also given her the rare gift of transformation. The next morning, she woke up early and went for a walk. The city was quiet, the sun just rising. She passed by the same street where she had first pulled over James Carter a year ago. The memories came flooding back. The sound of her voice, the flash of her anger, his calm face. But this time she smiled. The street no longer felt heavy. It felt like closure. She stopped for a moment, took a deep breath, and whispered, "Thank you." That day, she went to the station and began another training session. She looked at the new group of officers and said, "I want to start with a simple truth. Everyone we meet carries a story. If we take the time to listen, we'll serve better and we'll sleep better." They listened closely. Some of them had heard about her past. Others hadn't, but it didn't matter. They could feel her sincerity. She wasn't just teaching procedures, she was teaching heart. By the end of the day, as the sun set behind the city skyline, Karen walked out of the station feeling peaceful. She had found purpose again, not in authority but in empathy. From that moment, her life became a quiet symbol of hope. Newspapers called her the officer who changed herself to change others. Schools invited her to talk. Her story became part of the department's official training curriculum. And every time she was introduced, she humbly said, "I'm not a hero. I'm just proof that anyone can learn if they're willing to listen." Years later, when she would look back on her life, she wouldn't remember the medals, the speeches, or the applause. She would remember one simple image, the day she stood before a man she had hurt and saw not his anger but his mercy. That was the day everything changed.